They called him the Eater of Packs, a monster cloaked in dark fur and crowned with bone, who left nothing but ash and silence in his wake. When the massive doors of our crumbling hall exploded inward, even the fiercest warriors of the Bloodfang pack collapsed to their knees in primal terror. But I didn't tremble. I was just a slave. The runt lover they had beaten, starved, and humiliated for 10 endless years. I had nothing left to fear because I had nothing left to lose. When Alpha Garrick seized me by my matted hair and hurled me across the stone floor like refuse, I didn't cry out. My body had learned silence long ago. I landed hard at the base of a throne carved from black wood and bone, the impact rattling my bruised ribs. Above me, the temperature dropped. The air itself seemed to bow before him. "A gift, Your Majesty," Garrick's voice shook with false bravado as he groveled. "My most obedient servant, to serve your every need." I knew what I was, bait, a desperate offering from desperate cowards. They hoped my death would satisfy the beast's hunger. I pressed my forehead to the frozen stone and clutched my only secret, a small, worn white stone hidden in my dirt-caked palm. It was a foolish keepsake from a dying pup I'd saved a lifetime ago, when I still believed kindness mattered. A naive promise that someone, somewhere, had once cared whether I lived or died. Heavy boots stopped inches from my face. The hall fell into a silence so absolute I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I waited for the killing blow. I waited for oblivion. "Look at me." The command wasn't a growl. It was a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the stone and into my bones, ancient and absolute. Slowly, I lifted my chin, forcing my eyes upward to meet my executioner. I expected bloodlust. I expected a monster reveling in cruelty. Instead, I found molten gold eyes widening in shattered recognition. Eyes that I knew. Eyes that haunted my dreams. The king didn't strike. The mountain of a male, draped in furs and battle-scarred armor, his face half hidden beneath a crown of blackened bone and horn, fell to his knees before me. His massive, scarred hand reached out with impossible gentleness and touched the white stone trembling in my palm. The entire pack gasped as one, but their shock was a distant ocean. I could only hear the king's voice cracking with a decade of grief. "Marin," he whispered, and my name on his lips shattered something inside me. His thumb brushed away the grime on my hollow cheek. You kept it." The warning bells shattered the morning silence like bones breaking under teeth. I was elbow-deep in wash water when the first scream tore through the kitchens. The clay bowl I'd been scrubbing slipped from my trembling fingers and cracked against the stone floor. Around me, the other servants froze, their faces draining of color. "He's here," someone whispered, and the name that followed made my blood turn to ice. "The Eater of Packs." I'd heard the stories. Everyone had. Vorian Blackwood, the Lycan king who left nothing but silence and ash in his wake. Entire packs erased from existence. Alphas torn apart in their own halls. They said he wore a crown of bone taken from his enemies. They said his eyes glowed like molten gold in the dark, and that he could smell fear from miles away. The Bloodfang pack had been waiting for this moment, with the kind of dread that makes men stupid and desperate. Heavy boots thundered down the corridor above us. I pressed myself against the cold kitchen wall, instinctively making myself smaller, invisible. It was a skill I'd perfected over 10 years of servitude, how to become a shadow, a ghost, something not worth noticing. "You," Alpha Garrick's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. His meaty hand closed around my upper arm, yanking me away from the wall with enough force to dislocate my shoulder. I bit down on my tongue to keep from crying out. Pain was familiar. Pain was survivable. "You're coming with me." He dragged me through the servants' passages and up the winding stairs. My bare feet scraped against rough stone, leaving thin trails of blood, but Garrick didn't slow. His grip was iron, his breath sour with terror disguised as rage. "You should be grateful, runt lover," he hissed as we reached the main hall's entrance. "I'm giving your worthless hide a purpose." The massive oak doors stood open, and beyond them, winter had arrived early. The courtyard was filled with warriors, not ours, but his. The Lycan King's army stood in perfect formation, a sea of dark armor and darker intent. Frost clung to their shoulders like shrouds. They didn't move. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a threat that made the air itself feel heavy. And at the center of it all, seated on a throne that had been carved from black wood and carried into our territory like a declaration of ownership, sat the monster. Vorian Blackwood was enormous. Even seated, his frame dwarfed the wolves surrounding him. Thick furs draped across shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of kingdoms. His armor was scarred and battle-worn, dark metal that seemed to drink in the light. But it was the crown that truly terrified me, a twisted sculpture of blackened bone and horn that sat upon his head like a curse made tangible. I couldn't see his face. Not yet. He was too far away, and I was too far beneath his notice. Garrick shoved me forward, and I stumbled onto the frost-slicked stones of the courtyard. My knees hit the ground hard enough to split skin. Around me, I could hear the whimpers of our pack members, proud warriors reduced to cowering children. "Your Majesty," Garrick's voice boomed with false confidence as he prostrated himself. "The Bloodfang pack welcomes you. We come bearing gifts as a symbol of our allegiance." My stomach turned. I knew what I was, not a gift, a sacrifice. Garrick's fingers tangled in my hair, matted and unwashed, barely contained in a crude braid. And he dragged my head back, forcing me to arch my spine in a position of submission that made old bruises scream in protest. "My most obedient servant," Garrick announced, and I could hear the desperation bleeding through his words. "To serve your every need, my king, a token of our loyalty and respect." He released me with a violent shove, and I collapsed fully onto the frozen ground. My cheek pressed against ice that burned like fire. I kept my eyes down, fixed on the dirt beneath my fingernails, and clutched the only thing I had left in this world, a small, smooth white river stone hidden in my palm. It was foolish to keep it, dangerous even, but it was all I had of the boy I'd tried to save a lifetime ago when I still believed kindness mattered, when I still believed anyone would come back for me. The courtyard fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then I heard them, footsteps, heavy boots crossing the distance between the throne and where I lay broken on the ground. Each step was deliberate, measured, the sound of absolute power that didn't need to rush. The boots stopped inches from my face. I waited for the blow. I waited for hands around my throat or a blade between my ribs. I prayed it would be quick. "Look at me." The command wasn't a shout or a growl. It was something deeper, a resonance that vibrated through the stone beneath me and into my very bones. Ancient, absolute, inescapable. Slowly, with every ounce of courage I'd been hoarding for years, I lifted my head. My eyes traveled up, over battle-scarred boots, past armor that bore the marks of 1,000 victories, across a chest so broad it blocked out the pale morning sun. And then I saw his face. The world stopped. Beneath the crown of bone and shadow was a face carved from brutality and beauty in equal measure. A strong jaw covered in dark stubble, lips pressed into a hard line, scars that told stories of survival against impossible odds. But it was his eyes that destroyed me, molten gold, burning with an intensity that should have turned me to ash. I knew those eyes. My breath caught. The white stone in my palms suddenly felt like it was burning. "No," I whispered, the word barely a breath. "You can't be." His expression shattered. The monster vanished, and for one impossible moment, I saw the boy I'd saved, starving, broken, dying in the snow, staring back at me with a decade of grief written across his face. Vorian Blackwood, the eater of packs, the Lycan king, fell to his knees before me. The entire courtyard gasped as one. Even Garrick made a strangled sound of disbelief. But I couldn't hear any of it. I could only hear the tremor in the king's voice as his massive, scarred hand reached out with impossible gentleness and touched the white stone trembling in my palm. "Marin," his voice cracked like breaking ice. His thumb brushed away the dirt on my hollow cheek, and his touch was reverent, worshipful. You kept it." Tears I'd thought long dried up burned hot trails down my face. He was alive, The boy I'd saved was alive. And he'd come back for me. The journey to Vorian's fortress took 3 days, though I barely remembered any of it. I'd been placed in a covered carriage lined with furs so soft they felt obscene against my scarred skin. His servants, had tried to tend to me, offering food and water and clean clothes, but I couldn't make myself accept any of it. My body had learned over 10 years that kindness was a trap, that comfort was always followed by cruelty. So I sat in the corner of that opulent cage, knees drawn to my chest, and waited for the other boot to drop. Vorian rode alongside the carriage on a massive black warhorse. I could see his silhouette through the curtains, tall, imposing, never straying more than a few feet away. He didn't try to speak to me during the journey, didn't force his presence into the small space where I'd retreated into myself. I didn't know if that made it better or worse. When we finally arrived, night had already fallen. The fortress rose before us like something carved from a nightmare, towering black stone that seemed to swallow the moonlight, turrets that pierced the sky like accusations, walls so thick they could probably withstand a siege from the gods themselves. Ice clung to every surface, glittering like thousands of watchful eyes. "Welcome to Shadowhearth," a soft voice said beside me. I flinched violently, pressing myself against the carriage wall. A woman stood at the open door, older, with silver threading through her dark hair and kind eyes that looked like they'd seen too much suffering to judge anyone else's. "I'm Alara," she continued gently, making no move to touch me. "I oversee the household. The king has asked me to see you settled. No one will hurt you here, child. You have his word." His word? As if that meant anything. As if I could trust words from anyone, let alone from a king who wore bone as a crown. But I didn't have a choice, did I? So I climbed down from the carriage on shaking legs and followed Alara into the fortress. The interior was just as overwhelming as the exterior. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Torches cast dancing light across tapestries that depicted battles I didn't want to understand. Everything was dark stone and darker wood, polished to a shine that reflected my small, dirty form like an accusation. I didn't belong here. Every step I took on the pristine floors felt like desecration. Alara led me through a maze of corridors and up a winding staircase that seemed to climb forever. Finally, she stopped before a set of double doors carved with intricate patterns, wolves running beneath a full moon. "Your chambers," she said, pushing them open. I stepped inside and felt my breath catch. The room was larger than the entire servants' quarters back at Bloodfang. A massive bed dominated one wall, draped in midnight blue silks and piled with pillows that looked like clouds. A fireplace crackled with warmth. Thick rugs covered the stone floor. There were chairs upholstered in velvet, a writing desk with paper and ink, and windows, tall, arching windows that overlooked a snow-covered forest that stretched to the horizon. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. "There's a bathing room through that door," Alara said, gesturing to the left, "and a dressing chamber to the right. I'll have food sent up. Is there anything else you need?" Yes, I wanted to scream. I need to understand what's happening. I need to know what he wants from me. I need to know if this is real or if I'm dying in the snow and this is just my mind's last desperate fantasy. But what came out was, "Why am I here?" Alara's expression softened further. "Because the king wishes it, and what the king wishes, he gets." She paused, then added quietly, "He's been searching for you for a very long time, Marin. Whatever you're afraid of, it isn't him." She left before I could respond, the doors closing with a soft click that sounded horribly final. I stood in the center of that opulent room and felt more trapped than I ever had in the Bloodfang kitchens. At least there I'd known the rules, be invisible, endure, survive. But here, I didn't know what was expected of me, and that ignorance felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. I didn't touch the bed, didn't dare sit on the furniture. Instead, I sank down onto the floor in the corner farthest from the door, wrapped my arms around my knees, and tried to make myself small again. That's where Vorian found me an hour later. I heard the door open and immediately tensed, every muscle in my body coiling for impact. His footsteps were careful, measured, but they still made my heart hammer against my ribs. Marin! His voice was gentler than it had been in the courtyard, stripped of command. Just my name, spoken like a prayer. I forced myself to look up. He'd removed the crown and the heavy furs. Without them, he looked almost human. Still impossibly large, still scarred and battle-worn, but there was something in his eyes, something raw and uncertain, that made him seem less like the eater of packs and more like the dying pup I'd once cradled against my chest. "I brought food," he said, holding up a tray. "Ilara said you didn't eat in the carriage." I didn't respond. Couldn't. My throat had closed around all the words I didn't know how to say. Vorian moved slowly into the room, and I watched him with the same wary attention I'd given Alpha Garrick whenever he entered a space I occupied, watching for the tells, the shift in posture that meant violence was coming. But Vorian just set the tray down on the low table near the fireplace and stepped back, putting distance between us. "You don't have to eat if you're not hungry," he said. I wanted to make sure you had the option." Silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see him struggling with it, trying to figure out what to say to the broken thing he'd brought to his fortress. Finally, he lowered himself into one of the chairs, carefully, keeping his movements slow and predictable. "I know you're afraid," he said quietly. "I know you don't understand what's happening, and I know that nothing I say right now will make you trust me." He was right. He was absolutely right. "But I need you to understand one thing, Marin." His golden eyes found mine across the room, and the intensity in them nearly stopped my heart. "You are not a prisoner. You are not a servant. You are not here to serve me or please me or be used by me." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You saved my life when I was nothing, when I was less than nothing. You gave me a reason to survive, and I have spent every day since then trying to become strong enough to find you, to protect you, to give you back even a fraction of what you gave me." My vision blurred. I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "I don't want anything from you," Vorian continued, "except for you to heal, to rest, to know what it feels like to be safe." He started to stand, and I flinched, not because I thought he would hurt me, but because the movement was sudden, unexpected. Old instincts screaming danger. Vorian froze instantly. His expression crumpled with something that looked horribly like pain. "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded wrecked. "I moved too fast. I won't." He took a careful breath and settled back into the chair, making himself smaller, less threatening. "I'll be more careful." We sat there in silence, him in his chair, me on the floor, and I realized with startling clarity that the eater of packs, the monster who made entire armies kneel, was terrified of scaring me. "I'll leave you to rest," Vorian said finally. He stood again, slower this time, telegraphing every movement. "But I'll be right outside your door tonight. If you need anything at all, just call for me." He was almost to the door when I found my voice. It came out broken, barely audible, but it came. "Why?" He stopped, turned back to face me, and the look on his face, desperate, devoted, devastated, nearly undid me completely. "Because 10 years ago, you were the only person in the world who saw me as worth saving," Vorian said. "And I will spend the rest of my life proving that you were right." Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. I sat alone in that beautiful cage, and finally let myself cry. The winter that year had teeth. I'd lived through 16 winters in the Bloodfang pack, but none had bitten as deep as that one. The cold crept through every crack in the servants' quarters, turning our breath to fog and our fingers to useless, numb things that dropped dishes and earned us beatings. But it was nothing compared to what they'd done to the runt. I first saw him when Alpha Garrick dragged him past the kitchens by his scruff. He was small, so much smaller than the other juveniles, with matted dark fur and ribs that showed through his sides like prison bars. His golden eyes were glazed with pain and exhaustion. "Cursed thing," Garrick snarled, throwing him against the wall hard enough that I heard something crack. "Can't even shift properly. Useless waste of food." The pup Vorian, I'd heard them call him with contempt, didn't make a sound. Just pulled himself up on shaking legs and limped away, leaving droplets of blood in the snow. I should have looked away. Should have gone back to scrubbing pots and made myself invisible like I always did. Instead, I watched where he went. The cold was everything. Vorian huddled in the hollow beneath the old oak tree where they'd thrown him after the last beating. His ribs screamed with every breath. His left eye was swollen shut. The taste of his own blood had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. He was dying. He knew it with the certainty that comes when your body starts giving up, piece by piece. The pack had made their position clear. He was a mistake. A runt who couldn't shift completely, couldn't fight properly, couldn't be anything but a drain on resources. Better to let the winter take him than waste a clean death on something so worthless. He'd stopped feeling his paws hours ago. The cold had moved from uncomfortable to agonizing to nothing at all, just a distant numbness that he knew meant the end was close. At least it would be quiet. Then he heard footsteps crunching through the snow. Present day. I jerked awake with a gasp that tore from my throat like a scream. My hands clawed at the silk sheets, trying to find purchase in a world that kept shifting beneath me. The nightmare clung to me like oil Garrick's hands, the whip, the cold stone floor, the certainty that this time he wouldn't stop, this time I would finally break completely. It took me several ragged breaths to remember where I was. Not the servants' quarters, not the punishment room. Shadowhearth, Vorian's fortress. Safe. The word felt foreign, impossible. I pushed myself upright, my nightgown, soft cotton that one of the servants had left for me, clinging to my sweat-soaked skin. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in shades of amber and shadow. My throat was raw. Had I screamed? I couldn't remember. The thought of anyone hearing me, of being that exposed, sent fresh panic coursing through my veins. I stumbled out of bed, needing to move, needing to check the door, needing to. I yanked the door open and found Vorian sitting against the opposite wall. He looked up instantly, concern flooding his features. He was still dressed, though he'd removed his armor, just dark clothes and that watchful intensity that made my breath catch. "You're awake," he said softly, starting to rise. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out harsh, accusatory, a defense mechanism. Vorian's movements slowed, and he settled back against the wall, making himself unthreatening. "I told you I'd be right outside your door." That was, I tried to remember, hours ago, days. Time felt slippery in this place. "You've been out here the whole time." "Yes." 10 years ago. I'd stolen the scraps of meat from the Alpha's table, while everyone was distracted by the evening meal. My heart had hammered so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs, but I'd managed to wrap the food in a cloth and slip away into the darkness. Finding the hollow where they'd left Vorian to die took longer than I'd expected. The snow was thick, and I was terrified someone would see me, would demand to know what I was doing outside after curfew. But when I finally found him, all my fear evaporated into something sharper, horror. He was barely breathing. His sides rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. Snow had already begun to cover his dark fur, nature's way of burying what the pack had discarded. "No," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside him. "No, no, no, you can't." I didn't know why it mattered so much. I barely knew him, but something in me couldn't bear it, couldn't bear watching another broken thing die alone in the cold. I unwrapped the meat with numb fingers and held it close to his muzzle. "Please," I begged, "please try." His perspective then. The smell of food cut through the fog of dying like a knife. Vorian's working eye cracked open. At first, he thought he was hallucinating, that his mind had finally broken and was offering him false comfort in his last moments. But the girl kneeling beside him was real. He could smell her fear, her determination, her inexplicable compassion. She was thin, bruised, her servant's clothes threadbare and inadequate against the cold. She looked barely older than him. And she was crying. "Please," she said again, pressing the meat closer. "I know it hurts, I know you're tired, but please don't die, please." "Why?" he wanted to ask. "Why do you care?" But his jaw was too weak to form words, so he did the only thing he could. He ate. Each swallow was agony, but he forced it down because this girl, this stranger who had no reason to risk herself, was looking at him like his life mattered. Like he mattered. "That's it," she encouraged, her voice breaking with relief. "That's good, you're doing so good." When the meat was gone, she didn't leave. Instead, she pulled off her own threadbare cloak and draped it over him, then curled her body around his, sharing what little warmth she had. "My name's Marin," she whispered against his fur, "and you're going to survive this, I promise." In that moment, freezing and broken beneath a stranger's kindness, Vorian made a vow of his own. He would live. He would become strong. And he would find this girl again. He would repay this debt if it took him a lifetime. "Why?" I asked Vorian, my voice barely above a whisper. The nightmare still clung to the edges of my vision, making everything feel unsteady. "Why would you sit out here all night?" Vorian looked at me with those devastating gold eyes, and I saw the truth written plainly across his face. "Because 10 years ago you stayed with me when I was dying," he said quietly. "You didn't leave me alone in the dark. I thought," he trailed off, jaw working, "I thought maybe you wouldn't want to be alone either." Something cracked open in my chest, something I'd kept locked away for so long I'd forgotten it existed. "I had a nightmare," I admitted, the words dragged out of me against my will. "I know," his voice was impossibly gentle. "I heard you crying out. I wanted to come in to help, but I didn't want to frighten you more." So he'd sat outside my door in silent vigil, respecting my space while refusing to leave me unguarded. The eater of packs, the Lichen King, sitting on a cold stone floor all night because a broken servant girl might need him. "I don't understand you," I said, and it came out more honest than I'd intended. "I don't understand any of this." Vorian stood slowly, telegraphing every movement. "I know, and I'm not asking you to, not yet." He paused in the hallway, backlit by torchlight, looking more like a myth than a man. "But I will spend every day proving that you're safe here, that I meant what I said. You saved me, Marin, now let me return the favor." He started to walk away, back to whatever chamber he'd claimed as his own. "Vorian," I called, surprising myself. He stopped immediately, turning back with barely contained hope. "Thank you," I said, "for staying." The smile that broke across his face was small, tentative, and devastatingly real. "Always." After he disappeared down the corridor, I closed the door and leaned against it. For the first time in 10 years, the darkness didn't feel quite so suffocating. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone anymore. The healer's name was Thorn, and he had the kind of face that made you want to trust him, weathered but kind, with silver stubble and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. I didn't trust him. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said for the third time that morning, keeping his distance as he'd done during every examination for the past week. "I just need to check the scarring on your back. The salves should be helping, but I want to make sure there's no infection." I sat rigidly on the examination table in his quarters, my hands gripping the edge hard enough to make my knuckles white. The thin examination gown felt like exposure, like vulnerability, like all the times I'd been stripped down and reminded exactly how powerless I was. "Marin," Thorn's voice gentled further, "I can have Alara do this instead if you'd prefer, or we can wait until you're more comfortable." "No," the word came out sharper than I intended. I forced myself to take a breath. "No, it's fine, just tell me what you're going to do before you do it." "Of course." Thorn moved slowly into my peripheral vision, hands raised and empty. "I'm going to lower the gown just enough to see your shoulders and upper back. Just that, nothing else. And if you want me to stop at any point, you say the word." I nodded stiffly and felt the fabric shift. Cool air kissed my scarred skin, a roadmap of violence written across my body in raised welts and old wounds that had never healed properly. Thorn's sharp intake of breath made my stomach clench. "Who did this to you?" His voice had gone hard, clinical warmth replaced by barely suppressed rage. "Does it matter?" I asked flatly. "It's done." "It matters to the king." I felt him applying the salve, a cooling sensation that actually did help with the constant ache, and tried not to flinch at every touch. tried to remind myself that this wasn't punishment. This was supposed to be healing. I didn't know how to accept healing. The physical scars will fade, Thorne said quietly as he worked. Not completely, but enough that they won't cause you pain anymore. It's the other wounds I'm worried about. I'm fine, I lied automatically. You're not. He wasn't accusatory, just honest. And that's all right. You don't have to be fine, Marin, not here. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I said nothing at all. Vorian started joining me for meals on the 5th day. He didn't ask permission, didn't demand my company. He simply appeared in my chambers one morning carrying a tray laden with food, far more than I could ever eat, and settled into the chair across from where I sat curled in the window seat. I thought you might want company, he said, setting the tray on the small table between us. But if you'd rather I leave, I will. I should have told him to go. Should have protected what little solitude I'd managed to carve out in this overwhelming place. Instead, I heard myself say, "You can stay." Something bright and vulnerable flashed across his face before he schooled it back into careful neutrality. "Thank you." We ate in silence, or rather, he ate and I picked at a piece of bread, trying to ignore how my stomach had shrunk from years of near starvation. The food here was rich, abundant, and my body didn't know what to do with it. "You don't have to eat it all," Vorian said, noticing my discomfort. "Thorne says it'll take time for your body to adjust." "You talked to him about me. It wasn't a question." "I asked him how you were healing." Vorian set down his fork, giving me his full attention. "I know that probably feels invasive. I know you're not used to anyone caring about your well-being, but I need to know you're all right, Marin. I need..." He cut himself off, jaw tightening. "I need to know I got to you in time." There was something raw in his voice that made me look up from my bread, really look at him. He was watching me with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. His golden eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. I wondered if he'd slept at all since bringing me here, and his shoulders carried a tension that spoke of battles still being fought internally. "What do you want from me?" I asked suddenly. "Really, there has to be something. People don't just do this." "Do what?" "This." I gestured vaguely at the room, at the food, at him. "Go to war, build fortresses, search for years, not without wanting something in return." Vorian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and devastatingly sincere. "I want you to heal. I want you to learn what it feels like to be safe. I want you to go one full day without flinching or calculating escape routes or anticipating violence." He leaned forward slightly. "I want to give you back the childhood you should have had, the life you deserved, and I want absolutely nothing from you except the chance to try." "That's not how the world works," I said, but it came out weaker than I intended. "Then I'll change how the world works." The certainty in his voice made something ache behind my ribs. The meals became routine. Every morning and evening, Vorian would appear with food. Sometimes we ate in silence. Sometimes he would tell me stories, carefully edited tales of his travels that avoided the violence I knew lurked beneath every victory. Slowly, impossibly, I began to speak. It started small. A comment about the weather, a question about the fortress, fragments of conversation that felt like testing the structural integrity of a bridge before crossing. Vorian never pushed, never demanded more than I was willing to give. He just listened like every word I offered was something precious. 3 weeks after arriving at Shadowhearth, I finally asked the question that had been burning in my chest since that first day in the courtyard. "I thought you died." The words tumbled out during evening meal, breaking the comfortable quiet we'd fallen into. "In the woods, after you left, I thought. I was sure the winter took you." Vorian's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, giving me his complete focus. "You went back to look for me." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. 3 days later, when I could get away, but you were gone. There was blood in the snow, and I thought, my voice cracked, I thought I'd failed, that I hadn't saved you at all. "Marin," my name was a prayer on his lips. "You didn't fail. You gave me exactly what I needed to survive." Some scraps of meat and a ratty cloak. "Hope," the word hung in the air between us like something sacred. You gave me hope. You showed me that somewhere in this brutal world, kindness existed, that I was worth saving. And when I was stumbling through those woods, half dead and alone, that knowledge kept me moving. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought about you risking punishment to feed a dying runt. I thought about how you cried for me like my life mattered. He stood then, slowly so as not to startle me, and crossed to kneel beside my chair. Not trapping me, not crowding me, just close enough that I could see the truth written plainly in his eyes. I survived because of you, Vorian said, his voice rough with emotion. Every battle I fought, every territory I claimed, every impossible victory, I did it all to become strong enough to find you again, to protect you, to make sure you never had to suffer another day of what they put you through. Tears burned hot trails down my cheeks. You became a king. I became a monster, he corrected quietly. But I became a monster who could keep you safe, and I would do it all again. Burn 1,000 packs, conquer 1,000 kingdoms, whatever it took to get back to you. His hand moved slowly, telegraphing his intent, and settled gently over mine where it rested on the arm of the chair. The touch was warm, grounding, impossibly gentle from someone with so much blood on his hands. You saved me first, Marin, Vorian whispered. Now let me spend the rest of my life returning the favor. For the first time since arriving at Shadowhearth, for the first time in 10 years, I let myself lean into someone's touch. Let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe this impossible thing was real. That maybe I wasn't alone anymore. I'd been at Shadowhearth for nearly a month when Vorian told me about the council meeting. You don't have to come, he said quickly, reading the panic that must have shown on my face. We were in the library, a vast room lined with books I didn't know how to read but loved anyway, where I'd taken to spending my afternoons. But they need to see you, to understand that you're under my protection, that you're, he stopped himself, jaw working, that you matter. What if they don't think I should be here? The question came out smaller than I intended. Vorian's eyes hardened into something sharp and dangerous. Then they can take it up with me. That's how I found myself 3 days later, standing outside the council chamber in a dress that Alara had insisted I wear. It was deep green, simple but well-made, and it felt like armor I didn't know how to use. My hair had been washed and braided properly for the first time in years. I looked almost respectable. I felt like an imposter. Stay close to me, Vorian murmured as the guards pulled open the heavy doors. And remember, you have every right to be here. The council chamber was circular, with a high domed ceiling and windows that let in cold northern light. A massive table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs occupied by wolves who looked like they'd been born knowing how to command respect. Every eye turned to us as we entered. Vorian moved with absolute confidence, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back, guiding but not controlling. I tried to channel even a fraction of his certainty as I forced myself to meet their stares. Counselors, Vorian's voice filled the space effortlessly. I'd like to introduce Marin. She is a guest of Shadowhearth and under my personal protection. The silence that followed felt predatory. A man at the far end of the table, grizzled and battle-scarred, with more silver than black in his hair, broke it first. Your Majesty, with respect, we weren't informed you'd be bringing guests to council meetings. I'm informing you now, Commander Ulrich. Vorian's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Is there a problem? No problem, sire. But Ulrich's eyes raked over me with barely concealed skepticism. Just curious about the nature of this particular guest's visit. Vorian pulled out a chair for me, directly beside his own at the head of the table, and waited until I sat before taking his own seat. The message was clear. I wasn't some supplicant standing in the corner. I was being given a position of importance. It made my skin crawl with anxiety. Marin is here because I want her to understand how my kingdom operates, Vorian said smoothly. And because I value her presence. Any other questions? A woman seated 3 chairs down leaned forward. She was beautiful in the way predators are beautiful, all sharp edges and calculated grace. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves, and her dress probably cost more than the entire Bloodfang Pack's annual tribute. Everything about her screamed nobility, power, privilege. Lady Severin, Vorian acknowledged with a nod that held more warning than warmth. Your Majesty, her smile was all teeth. I'm simply wondering what qualifications this guest possesses that warrant her attendance at council. We discuss sensitive matters of state here, matters that require discretion and understanding of political nuance. Marin's qualifications are not your concern, Vorian said flatly. Lady Severin's smile sharpened. Of course, sire, I merely question whether someone of her background can truly appreciate the complexities we navigate. After all, her eyes slid to me, assessing and dismissive in equal measure. She does still carry that unfortunate slave stench. I can smell it from here. The table went deathly quiet. I felt the words like a physical blow. Felt myself shrinking instinctively, trying to become invisible again, trying to remember that people like her were right. I didn't belong here. I was nothing. I was. I may have been a slave. The words came out of my mouth before my brain could catch up. Everyone's attention snapped to me like arrows finding their target. I swallowed hard and forced myself to continue, even as my hands shook beneath the table. I may have been a slave, but I saved a life while you lot were bowing to tyrants. Lady Severin's expression froze. I risked everything when I had nothing, I continued, my voice gaining strength from some deep reservoir I didn't know I possessed. I showed compassion when the world had shown me only cruelty, and that slave stench you're so concerned about. I leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze dead on. That's the smell of someone who survived, who endured, who chose kindness over survival when most people would have looked away. The silence now was different, charged. So yes, Lady Severin, I said quietly, I was a slave, but at least I know what it means to be human. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then Vorian's hand found mine under the table and squeezed gently. When I glanced at him, the expression on his face nearly undid me, pride so fierce it was almost painful to witness. Well said, he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. Then louder. Does anyone else have concerns about Marin's presence? Because I'd be happy to address them now. Commander Ulrich cleared his throat. No concerns here, Your Majesty. Lady Marin is welcome as far as I'm concerned. A few others murmured agreement. Lady Severin's face had gone carefully blank, but her eyes promised retribution. The meeting proceeded, and I barely heard any of it. My heart was still racing, my body flooding with adrenaline from having spoken up, from having defended myself against someone who could probably destroy me with a word. But I'd done it. For the first time in my life, I hadn't apologized for existing. After the council was dismissed, Vorian kept my hand in his as we walked back through the corridors. He didn't speak until we reached a quiet alcove overlooking the fortress grounds. You were magnificent, he said, turning to face me fully. His eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously close to admiration. The way you stood up to Severin Marin, I don't think you understand how extraordinary you are. I was terrified, I admitted. I'm still terrified. She's going to make me pay for that. Let her try. Vorian's voice dropped into something dark and protective. She touches you. She so much as looks at you wrong, and she'll learn exactly why they call me the Eater of Packs. I believed him. That was the terrifying part. I believed he would burn his own court down to keep me safe. Why does she hate me? I asked. She doesn't even know me. Vorian's jaw tightened. Severin had ambitions of becoming queen. She's been positioning herself for years, and then I brought you home. He brushed a strand of hair from my face with heartbreaking gentleness. She sees you as competition. But I'm not. I started to protest. Aren't you? Vorian's thumb traced my cheekbone. You're the person who holds my loyalty, my gratitude, He stopped himself, something vulnerable flickering across his features. You matter to me more than any political alliance ever could, and that makes you dangerous to people like Severin. We stood there in the alcove, the winter sun casting long shadows across his face, and I realized something that both thrilled and terrified me. Vorian wasn't just protecting me out of debt or obligation. He cared, actually cared. and I was starting to care back. "Thank you," I said softly, "for believing I could handle the council." "I never doubted you for a second." Vorian smiled, one of those rare, genuine expressions that transformed his entire face. "You survived 10 years of hell with your compassion intact. A room full of politicians was never going to break you." As we continued walking, his hand still wrapped around mine, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there. But beneath it, something else was growing. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The evening had been quiet, almost pleasant. I'd spent the afternoon in the gardens with Alara, learning the names of winter flowers that somehow survived the frost. Vorian had been occupied with military matters, so I'd taken dinner alone in my chambers, actually managing to finish most of the meal. Thorn would be proud. I was curled in the window seat with a book of illustrations, pictures I could understand even if the words remained mysterious, when the knock came. "Enter," I called, expecting Alara coming to collect the dinner tray. Instead, a young servant I didn't recognize stepped inside. He was thin, nervous-looking, with darting eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. "Begging your pardon, my lady," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "The king requested I bring you this, a special wine from the Southern Territories. He thought you might enjoy it." He set a crystal glass on the table beside me. The wine inside was deep red, almost black in the candlelight. Something felt wrong. "The king sent this?" I asked carefully. "Yes, my lady, just now, he said." The servant's hands shook as he backed toward the door. "He said to make sure you drank it while it was still warm. Special spices, you see. They need the heat too." The door exploded inward. Vorian moved like lightning, crossing the room in 3 strides. His hand shot out and grabbed the glass before I could even think about reaching for it. The crystals shattered in his grip, wine and blood spattering across the floor. The servant bolted. Vorian snarled, an actual primal sound that raised every hair on my body, and lunged after him. But before he could reach the door, guards flooded in, already in pursuit of the fleeing man. "Don't let him leave the fortress," Vorian commanded, his voice barely human. "And bring Commander Ulrich, now." The guards scattered. Vorian turned back to me, and the expression on his face made my chest tight. His eyes had gone completely gold, wolf rising to the surface, and his hands were still bleeding from the shattered glass. "Did you drink any?" He was beside me in an instant, his uninjured hand cupping my face, tilting my head to examine me. "Marin, did any of it touch your lips?" "No," my voice came out steadier than I felt. "No, I didn't drink anything. You got here before." The reality of what had almost happened hit me like a physical blow. "Someone tried to poison me." "Someone tried to kill you." Vorian's thumb brushed my cheek, and I realized I was shaking. "In my fortress, under my protection, they tried to." His voice cracked, fury and fear warring in equal measure. He pulled me against his chest, one arm wrapping around me, while the other still dripped blood onto the floor. I could feel his heart hammering against my ear, could feel the tremor running through his massive frame. "I could have lost you," he whispered into my hair. "If I'd been 1 minute later, if I hadn't sensed something was wrong, if I hadn't." "But you did," I said, my hands fisting in his shirt. "You got here in time." We stayed like that for a long moment, him holding me like I might disappear, me anchoring myself to his solidity. Outside, I could hear shouting, running footsteps, the fortress mobilizing. A knock at the door made us both tense. "Your Majesty," Commander Ulrich's gravel voice, "we have him." The dungeons beneath Shadowhearth were exactly as brutal as I'd expected. All stone and iron, and the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. Vorian had tried to convince me to stay upstairs, but I'd refused. "I need to see this," I'd told him. "I need to understand." Now, standing in the torchlit corridor outside the cell, I was regretting that decision. The servant, though I suspected he was no true servant, had been chained to the wall. His face was already bruised from the guard's capture, and his eyes held the glazed look of someone who knew they were dead regardless of what they said. Vorian stood before him like an avenging deity, radiating violence, so intense the air itself felt heavy with it. "Who sent you?" His voice was arctic cold. The prisoner spat blood onto the floor. "Go to hell, king." Vorian moved faster than should have been possible for someone his size. His hand closed around the man's throat, lifting him off his feet despite the chains. "Wrong answer," Vorian growled. "I'll ask once more and then I start removing pieces. Who sent you?" The prisoner choked, his face turning purple. I could see the exact moment he broke, when self-preservation overrode whatever loyalty or fear had kept him silent. "Bloodfang," he gasped when Vorian released the pressure slightly. "Garrick's brother, Fennec. He's rallying the survivors, building a resistance. They want revenge for what you did to the pack." "And they chose to target Marin." Vorian's grip tightened again. "They thought they could kill her and I'd what? Let it go, accept it." "They thought it would destroy you," the prisoner wheezed. "Break your focus, make you weak." Vorian laughed, but there was no humor in it, only dark promise. "They have no idea what I'm capable of when someone threatens what's mine." He dropped the prisoner, who crumpled to the floor, coughing. Then Vorian turned to Commander Ulrich. "Assemble a hunting party," he ordered. "I want every Bloodfang survivor found. I want Fennec's head on a pike by week's end. I want—" "Wait." My voice cut through his fury like a blade. Everyone turned to stare at me, Vorian, Ulrich, even the prisoner. I stepped forward, my legs steadier than I expected. "Don't execute him yet." Vorian's eyes widened. "Marin." "I want answers first." I looked at the prisoner, and something cold settled in my chest, something that felt dangerously like the steel I'd heard in Vorian's voice. "How many others are there? Inside Shadowhearth? How many other Bloodfang conspirators are hiding in your court?" The prisoner's eyes darted to Vorian, seeking permission or perhaps mercy. He found neither. "Answer her," Vorian commanded. "She asked you a question." I don't know all of them," the man stammered. "We kept it compartmentalized, but there are others. In the kitchens, the guard, maybe even—" He stopped himself. "Even where?" I pressed, surprised by my own persistence. "Finish what you were saying." "Even in the council," he admitted. "That's all I know, I swear." I turned to Vorian. "We need to root them out, all of them, before they try again." Something shifted in Vorian's expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him reassessing, recalculating. "You're right," he said finally. Then, to Ulrich, "Keep him alive for now. I want names, locations, everything he knows about this resistance. Use whatever methods necessary, but keep him breathing." Ulrich nodded sharply and began issuing orders to his men. Vorian guided me back toward the stairs, his hand protectively at my back. Once we were out of earshot of the dungeons, he stopped and turned me to face him. "You didn't have to come down here," he said quietly. "You didn't have to see that." "Yes, I did." I met his gaze steadily. "Someone tried to kill me, Vorian, in your home, and they're going to try again unless we stop them. I can't hide in my chambers hoping you'll protect me from everything. I need to understand what we're facing." "We," Vorian repeated, something bright and fierce igniting in his eyes. "You said we." I realized he was right. Somewhere between the council chamber and tonight, I'd stopped thinking of Shadowhearth as his kingdom and started thinking of it as ours. "They're my enemies too now," I said simply. "The moment they came after me, this became my fight as much as yours." Vorian's hand came up to cup my face, his touch infinitely gentle despite the violence still humming beneath his skin. "You're not who I expected you to be." "What did you expect?" "Someone who needed constant protection, someone fragile." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "But you're not fragile, are you? You're steel wrapped in soft skin. You survived hell and came out the other side still capable of compassion, still capable of standing in a dungeon and demanding answers instead of vengeance." "I still want vengeance," I admitted quietly. "Good." Vorian's smile was dark and promising. "Then we'll get it together." The investigation into the Bloodfang conspirators had consumed the fortress for 3 days. Vorian barely slept, coordinating with Ulrich to identify and quietly remove the threats embedded in his household. 5 more traitors had been found, 2 servants, a stable hand, and shockingly, one of the lesser council members. I'd watched him push himself to exhaustion, seen the shadows deepen under his eyes, the tension coil tighter in his shoulders. So when he finally appeared at my door on the 4th evening, I didn't let him leave. "You need to rest," I said firmly, blocking his path when he tried to make excuses about guard rotations and security measures. "Marin, I can't." "You can." I grabbed his hand and pulled him inside with more boldness than I'd known I possessed. "Sit, eat something. The conspirators aren't going anywhere in the next hour, and you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or gratitude, before he allowed himself to be led to the chairs by the fireplace. I'd already had dinner brought up, anticipating this fight. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind we'd built over weeks of shared meals. But I could feel the weight pressing down on him, see the way his mind was still racing through scenarios and contingencies. "Talk to me," I said quietly. "Not about the conspiracy or the threats, just talk, tell me something real." Vorian set down his fork and leaned back, closing his eyes. "What do you want to know?" "How did you survive?" The question had been building in me for weeks. "After you left the Bloodfang pack, you were so close to death, Vorian. How did you make it?" His eyes opened, distant with memory. "I don't remember much of the first few days, just cold and pain and forcing myself to keep moving. But then," he paused, "then I found shelter. Or rather, shelter found me." "What do you mean?" "There was someone in those woods." His voice went soft, reverent. "A wolf, pale gray, almost white, with ash or snow dusting their fur. I was hallucinating by then, barely conscious, but they appeared like a ghost. They dragged me to a cave, kept me warm, taught me how to hunt, how to survive. 3 days and 3 nights they stayed with me." My chest tightened. I knew this story, I'd lived it. "They never spoke," Vorian continued, lost in the memory. "Never shifted to human form, but they saved my life just as surely as you did. And then one morning I woke up and they were gone, just vanished. I searched for them, Marin, for years. I followed every rumor of a pale wolf, investigated every pack, searched every territory." His hands fisted on his knees. "I thought if I could find them, if I could repay both of you, then maybe I'd finally be worthy of what you gave me." "Oh no." "Vorian," I started, my voice cracking. "They call them the Pale Wolf in the stories I've heard," he said. "This mysterious figure who appears in desperate times and then disappears. I've met so-called witnesses, tracked false leads across half the kingdom. They've become almost mythical to me, this second savior I could never find, never thank, never." "It was me." The words fell between us like stones. Vorian went utterly still. His eyes snapped to mine, wide with disbelief. "What?" "The Pale Wolf." My hands were shaking. I pressed them together to still them. "It was me, Vorian. I followed you into the woods." "No," he shook his head, standing abruptly. "No, that's not possible. You were just a girl. You couldn't have." "I could barely shift back then," I interrupted, the words tumbling out now that I'd started. "It was forbidden for slaves, but my mother taught me in secret before she died. I was so terrified you'd die out there alone that I snuck out 3 nights in a row. I covered myself in ash to hide my scent from the pack trackers." Vorian stared at me like I'd just torn open reality and shown him something impossible. "You were delirious most of the time," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "Feverish. I didn't think you'd remember. You kept calling for your mother, for someone to help you, so I stayed. I showed you how to strip bark for emergency food, how to track rabbit trails, how to make yourself small to conserve heat. And when I thought you'd stabilized enough to survive, I had to leave before the dawn patrol found me missing." "The white stone." Vorian's voice was strangled. "I gave you the white stone before you left. I remember. I was so weak I could barely move, but I managed to find it in the river nearby. I pressed it into your paw and you shifted just enough for your human hand to close around it." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I didn't think you'd remember any of it. You were barely conscious." "I remembered everything." He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees in front of my chair, the Lycan king kneeling before me again, but this time he looked shattered. I remembered a pale ghost who refused to let me die, who taught me the skills that kept me alive for years, who disappeared and left me searching. His voice broke. It was you. All along it was you. His hands came up to frame my face, trembling against my skin. You didn't just save me once, Marin. You saved me twice. You gave up everything, risked your life, risked discovery and punishment, not once but twice, and you never asked for anything in return. I didn't need anything in return, I whispered. I just needed you to live. Vorian made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I've spent 10 years conquering kingdoms, building armies, searching every corner of this world for 2 people. And they were the same person. You were both of them. You were everything. He pressed his forehead against my knees, his massive shoulders shaking. I'd never seen him like this, completely undone, all the armor stripped away. You gave me everything, he said against my skirt. You gave me life, you gave me hope, you gave me the skills to survive and the reason to keep fighting. You gave me everything, Marin, and I have spent every day since trying to become someone worthy of that gift. What can I possibly give you that would be enough? I slid from the chair to kneel with him on the floor, my hands finding his face and tilting it up so he had to look at me. His golden eyes were wet, devastatingly vulnerable. You already came back, I said, my own tears falling freely now. You survived. You became strong. You found me again when I thought I'd die alone and forgotten in that pack. You came back, Vorian. That's enough. That's everything. He pulled me against his chest, wrapping his arms around me like I was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. I could feel his heart hammering against mine, could feel the way his breath hitched with emotion he'd probably been holding back for a decade. I looked for you in every face, he whispered into my hair. In every territory I conquered, I searched the crowds hoping I'd see your eyes. I built this entire kingdom on the foundation of becoming strong enough to protect you. And you were suffering because I wasn't fast enough, because I didn't find you sooner. You found me when I needed you most, I said fiercely. Right before I gave up completely, you walked through those doors. Your timing was perfect. We stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the floor in front of the fire, holding each other like the world outside didn't exist. 2 broken people who'd saved each other across time and distance and impossible odds. When Vorian finally pulled back, his hands still cradling my face, there was something different in his eyes. Something settled, like a piece of himself he'd been missing had finally clicked into place. You're not just my savior, he said quietly. You're my beginning, my reason, he stopped himself, jaw working. You're everything I fought for, Marin, everything I'll continue fighting for. Then fight with me, I said. Not just for me, with me, as equals. The smile that broke across his face was devastating in its joy. Always. He helped me back into my chair, but this time he didn't return to his own. He settled on the floor beside me, his head resting against my knee in a gesture of trust and intimacy that made my breath catch. Tell me more, he said softly. About those 3 days, I want to remember all of it. So I did, and as I spoke, his hand found mine and held on like I was the anchor keeping him from drifting away. Like I'd always been his anchor. Like maybe he'd always been mine too. The blood moon hung in the sky like an omen, turning the snow outside my windows crimson. 3 weeks had passed since the revelation about the pale wolf. 3 weeks of Vorian quietly dismantling the last of the Bloodfang resistance while simultaneously planning something that terrified me more than any assassination attempt. A coronation ceremony. My coronation ceremony. Hold still, Elara chided gently as she adjusted the ceremonial gown for what felt like the 100th time. We're almost done. I stared at my reflection in the full-length mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman looking back wore midnight blue silk embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like starlight. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours. Delicate chains of silver adorned her throat and wrists, not shackles but jewelry, though my body couldn't always tell the difference. She looked like she belonged in a palace. She looked nothing like the slave girl who'd scrubbed floors and stolen scraps for a dying pup. "You're beautiful," Alara said softly, stepping back to admire her work. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "That's allowed," she squeezed my shoulder. "But you're ready for this, Marin, more ready than you know." A knock at the door made us both turn. Vorian entered, and whatever words I'd been about to say died in my throat. He wore formal armor, black and silver, polished to perfection, with a cloak of dark fur across his shoulders. The crown of bone had been replaced with something new, a circlet of dark metal inlaid with moonstones that caught the crimson light. He looked every inch the Lycan king. He looked terrifying and magnificent and mine. "Leave us," Vorian said quietly to Alara, his eyes never leaving my face. She curtsied and slipped out, closing the door behind her. Vorian crossed to me slowly, and I saw his throat work as he took me in. He stopped, started again. "Marin, you're breathtaking." "I'm a fraud." The words burst out before I could stop them. "Vorian, I can't do this. I can't stand in front of your entire court and let you claim me as queen. I don't know how to be what they need. I don't know how to be what you need." He was in front of me in an instant, his hands framing my face. "What I need is you, exactly as you are." "But look at me." I gestured helplessly at the gown, the jewelry, the elaborate facade. "This isn't me. I'm not this polished, perfect thing. I'm broken, Vorian. I'm scared all the time. I wake up from nightmares thinking I'm back in the Bloodfang kitchens. I flinch at loud noises. I don't know which fork to use at formal dinners, and I can barely read an eye." "And you're the strongest person I've ever known," Vorian interrupted firmly. "You survived a decade of abuse with your compassion intact. You saved my life twice. You stood up to Lady Severin in front of the entire council. You demanded answers from your would-be assassin instead of crying for vengeance. You are exactly what this kingdom needs, Marin, what I need." "What about what the kingdom wants?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Half your council thinks I'm unworthy. The nobility whispers about my past. Even now there are Bloodfang loyalists plotting to kill me. Maybe," I forced the words out, "maybe you should let me go, find someone suitable, someone who won't bring you political nightmares and assassination attempts." Vorian's hands tightened on my face, and his eyes blazed with something fierce and absolute. "Let you go? Marin, I would burn this kingdom to the ground before I let you go." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," I whispered. He pulled back slightly, studying my face with an intensity that made me feel exposed. "You think I'd choose political convenience over you, after everything? I think you've worked too hard to build this kingdom to let me destroy it." "Then you don't understand." Vorian's voice dropped to something raw and honest. "I built this kingdom so I could find you. Every territory I claimed, every pack I conquered, every alliance I forged, it was all so I could become powerful enough to protect you, to give you the life you deserved, to stand beside you without shame or fear." He stepped back and, in a movement that still stole my breath, dropped to one knee before me. "This kingdom exists because of you," Vorian said, looking up at me with devastating sincerity. "And if the price of keeping you is burning it all down and starting over, I'll pay it gladly. Let them come. Let the whole world come. You are mine to protect, and I am yours to command." Tears spilled down my carefully made-up face. "Vorian." "I'm not asking you to be perfect," he continued. "I'm not asking you to know which fork to use or how to navigate court politics. I'm asking you to stand beside me as my equal, to let me love you the way you deserve to be loved, to choose me the way I chose you 10 years ago when you fed a dying runt in the snow." "Love," the word came out strangled. We danced around it for weeks, this thing building between us, but neither of us had named it. Vorian stood, his hands finding mine and holding them against his chest. I could feel his heart racing beneath my palms. "Love," he confirmed. "I have loved you since the moment you risked everything to save someone the world had deemed worthless. I loved you when I was struggling to survive in those woods, remembering your tears. I loved you through every battle, every victory, every lonely night when I wondered if I'd ever find you again. And I love you now, Marin, completely, irrevocably, regardless of what the court thinks or what enemies we face or what fears you carry." I couldn't breathe. couldn't think past the enormity of what he was offering me. "You don't have to say it back," Vorian said quickly, reading my panic. "I'm not asking for that. I just need you to know that tonight, the ceremony claiming you as my mate and queen, it's not political strategy. It's not debt repayment. It's me choosing you, publicly, permanently, and daring anyone to question that choice." "They will question it," I said. "They already are." "Let them." His smile was dark and full of promise. "I've spent 10 years proving I'm not someone to be trifled with. If they want to test that by coming after you, they'll learn exactly why I'm called the Eater of Packs." Despite everything, I almost laughed. "You're really willing to risk civil war over me?" "I'm willing to risk everything over you." Vorian brought my hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to each palm. "But I don't think it'll come to that. You underestimate yourself, Marin. When you walk into that ceremony tonight, when you stand beside me and accept this bond, they're not going to see a former slave. They're going to see their queen, strong, compassionate, brave enough to survive hell and kind enough to save a monster." "You're not a monster," I said reflexively. "I am," Vorian corrected gently. "I've done monstrous things, killed countless wolves, destroyed entire bloodlines. But you," his voice caught, "you looked at that monster and saw someone worth saving anyway. That's the kind of strength that inspires loyalty, Marin. That's the kind of ruler people follow not because they fear them, but because they believe in them." I looked into his golden eyes and saw nothing but absolute conviction. He truly believed every word he was saying. Believed in me in a way I'd never believed in myself. "What if I fail?" I asked quietly. "What if I can't be what they need?" "Then we'll fail together." Vorian's thumb brushed away my tears. "But I don't think you will. I think you're going to walk into that hall and show them exactly who Marin is, not the scared slave girl, but the woman who has survived and endured and somehow kept her heart soft despite everything the world threw at her." Outside, bells began to ring. The ceremony would begin soon. Vorian offered me his arm. "Ready." I took a shaking breath and placed my hand on his arm. The weight of the silver chains at my wrist felt less like adornment and more like armor. "No," I admitted, "but I'll do it anyway." His smile could have lit the darkness. "That's my queen." As we walked toward the ceremony hall, I tried to quiet the voice in my head that screamed about danger, about unworthiness, about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. I didn't know that in less than an hour, that voice would be proven right. I didn't know that the Bloodfang conspirators had planned one final, desperate strike. And I didn't know that by the end of the night, I would make a choice that would define exactly who I was, not a victim waiting to be saved, but a woman willing to save herself. The Great Hall had been transformed into something out of legend. Torches cast dancing shadows across walls draped in midnight silk. The blood moon's crimson light poured through the tall windows, bathing everything in shades of rust and gold. Representatives from every pack in the kingdom filled the space, hundreds of wolves in their finest dress, watching with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and hostility. I felt their eyes on me like physical weight, as Vorian led me down the central aisle, toward the raised dais where the ritual would take place. Commander Ulrich stood at attention, his weathered face carefully neutral. Lady Severin watched from her position among the council, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp as knives. Ilara gave me an encouraging nod from the crowd. And somewhere in this sea of faces, hidden among the loyal and the curious, were the conspirators waiting for their moment. Vorian's hand tightened on mine as we ascended the dais. "I'm right here," he murmured. "Whatever happens, I'm right here." The hall fell silent as we took our positions facing each other. An elder wolf, ancient and gray, with ceremonial robes that marked him as a keeper of the old traditions, stepped forward between us. "We gather under the blood moon," his voice rang out, "to witness the sacred bond between our king and his chosen mate. Let any who would challenge this union speak now, or hold their peace for all eternity." The silence stretched. I held my breath, waiting for someone to object, to voice what half the room was surely thinking. No one spoke. The elder continued. "The mating bond is eternal and unbreakable, Once formed, the souls become intertwined. One's pain becomes the other's, one's joy is shared, one's death. A sound cut through his words, a wet thunk followed by a collective gasp. The elder's eyes widened. He looked down at the arrow protruding from his chest, then collapsed. Time seemed to fracture. I saw the second arrow before my mind fully processed what was happening. Saw it arcing through the air toward Vorian's heart, silver-tipped and deadly. My body moved before conscious thought. I threw myself in front of him, my arms spreading wide as if I could shield his massive frame with my smaller body. The arrow hit me high in the shoulder, punching through silk and flesh with brutal efficiency. The pain was immediate and blinding. Maren, Vorian's roar shook the rafters. I stumbled and his arms caught me before I could fall. Through the haze of agony, I saw chaos erupting in the hall, guards converging, figures in the crowd throwing off disguises, more arrows flying. And I saw him, Fennec, Garrick's brother, standing on a balcony with a crossbow aimed at Vorian's exposed back. "Behind you," I managed to choke out. Vorian moved with impossible speed, spinning us so his body shielded mine. The arrow meant for his spine struck his armor instead, glancing off harmlessly. But something in him snapped. The transformation was nothing like the controlled shifts I'd seen from other wolves. This was primal, volcanic, terrifying. Vorian's body exploded outward, bones cracking and reforming, muscles expanding, fur erupting across skin. In seconds, he'd become something out of nightmare. A massive beast that stood nearly 8 feet tall, all midnight fur and golden eyes and teeth that could tear through steel. He was magnificent. He was monstrous. He was losing himself to rage. "Kill them all," the beast snarled in a voice barely recognizable as Vorian's. His pack warriors surged forward, engaging the conspirators in brutal close combat. Blood sprayed across the ceremonial silks. I could feel him slipping away, feel the human part of Vorian drowning beneath primal fury, and the need to destroy everything that threatened his mate. "Vorian," my voice came out weak, almost lost in the chaos. He didn't hear me. He was already moving toward Fennec with murder in his eyes. "Voran," I screamed louder, forcing myself upright despite the arrow still lodged in my shoulder. "I'm still here, I'm still here." He froze mid-lunge. Slowly, his massive head turned toward me. Those golden eyes, more wolf than man, found mine across the blood-soaked hall. "I'm still here," I repeated, my voice steadier now despite the pain. "And I need you, not the beast, you." Something shifted in his gaze, recognition flickering through the haze of rage. I took a step toward him, ignoring the way the movement made my vision swim. "Come back to me. Please come back." The transformation reversed gradually, fur receding, bones reshaping, humanity reasserting itself. When Vorian stood before me again in mostly human form, his eyes were wet with unshed tears. He reached for me with trembling hands. "You're hurt, you're bleeding, you." "God in front of an arrow meant for you," I finished, "and I'd do it again." Behind us, Commander Ulrich's soldiers had subdued most of the conspirators. Fennec was being dragged from the balcony, struggling and cursing. Vorian pulled Fennec free from the guard's grip with one hand, lifting the man by his throat. "You tried to kill her," he said, his voice still carrying an edge of beast. "In my hall, during the sacred ritual, you tried to take her from me." Fennec spat blood. "Should have aimed for her first. Killing her would have destroyed you more than." Vorian's hand tightened, cutting off the words. "You're right, losing her would destroy me, but you didn't succeed." With brutal efficiency, Vorian snapped Fennec's neck and let the body crumple to the floor. No ceremony, no trial, just absolute finality. The hall went deathly silent. Vorian turned back to me, his hands gentle as they assessed my injury. "We need to get you to Thorn. This arrow needs to come out." "No," I gripped his wrist with my good hand. "Not yet, we finish this first." "Maren, you're bleeding." "I'm standing," I corrected, "and I have something to say." I turned to face the assembled court, hundreds of witnesses to the violence, The chaos, the revelation of how deep the conspiracy had run. Some looked horrified. Some looked impressed. Most looked uncertain about what came next. I took a breath that made my shoulders scream and projected my voice across the hall. "I am not your victim," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "I know what you see when you look at me, a former slave, a girl with no name, no lineage, no claim to power, someone who doesn't belong standing beside your king." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vorian stood at my back, solid and supportive, but letting me speak. "But I am not asking for your permission," I continued. "I am not begging for your acceptance. I am telling you who I am." I gestured to the arrow still protruding from my shoulder. "I am the woman who just took an arrow meant for your king. I am his savior, twice over. I am the reason he survived to build this kingdom, and he is mine." I turned slightly so I could see Vorian's face. "He is my savior, my protector, my choice." Vorian's expression was pure devastation and devotion. I faced the court again. "I am not your slave, I am your queen, and I choose him freely. The question is, will you accept that choice, or will you spend your lives fighting against it?" The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Commander Ulrich stepped forward and dropped to one knee. "My queen," he said simply. Ilara followed, then others. Like a wave, the court began to kneel, some readily, some reluctantly, but all acknowledging what had just occurred. Even Lady Severin bent her knee, though her face was carefully blank. Vorian's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "Thorn," he said quietly to a guard. "Now." As the healer rushed forward, Vorian gathered me carefully against his chest. "That was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed," he murmured against my hair. "Did I do it right?" The adrenaline was fatting, leaving exhaustion and pain in its wake. "You were perfect." He pressed a kiss to my forehead as Thorn began examining the arrow. "My fierce, brave, perfect queen." The elder wolf, a different one since the first lay dead nearby, approached cautiously. "Your Majesties, if you wish to complete the ritual." "Yes," I said before Vorian could suggest postponing. "Now, before anything else goes wrong." Vorian's eyes searched mine. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." So there, with Thorn working to remove the arrow from my shoulder, with the bodies of our enemies cooling on the floor, with the blood moon watching through crimson windows, we completed the mating bond. Vorian took my uninjured hand and pressed it over his heart. I did the same with my good hand against his chest. The elder spoke the ancient words, but I barely heard them. I was too focused on the feeling building between us, a connection snapping into place like a key turning in a lock. When our eyes met, I felt it. Everything. His love, his devotion, his absolute conviction that I was worth any cost. And he felt mine, my trust, my choice, my decision to stop just surviving and start truly living. "Bound in blood, sealed by choice, eternal until death," the elder intoned. The bond settled into my chest, like coming home. Vorian pulled me close, mindful of my injury, and kissed me with a gentleness that contradicted the violence that still stained the hall. "My queen," he whispered. "My king," I answered. And this time I believed it. The first snow of the season fell softly as we rode through the forest, transforming the landscape into something crystalline and new. My shoulder had healed weeks ago, leaving only a faint scar that Vorian traced sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, a reminder of the moment I'd chosen him as completely as he'd chosen me. The kingdom had settled into an uneasy peace. The remaining Bloodfang conspirators had either sworn loyalty or fled beyond our borders. Lady Severin, surprisingly, had become one of my most valuable advisors once she'd accepted that her ambitions for the throne were finished. Commander Ulrich treated me with genuine respect, and even the council had stopped questioning my presence at meetings. I was learning to be queen, not the polished, perfect version I'd feared they needed, but something more honest. I spoke for those without voices. I reformed the laws around servants and slaves. I made mistakes and acknowledged them. And slowly, impossibly, I was earning their respect not because I was Vorian's mate, but because of who I was. But today wasn't about the kingdom or politics or the weight of the crown I now wore. Today was about closure. "Are you sure about this?" Vorian asked as we dismounted near the edge of the woods that bordered what had once been Bloodfang territory. The pack had been disbanded, its lands absorbed into our kingdom under strict reforms. No one would suffer there as I had suffered. I'd made sure of that. I reached into the pocket of my riding cloak and felt the smooth surface of the White River stone. I'd carried it for 10 years, through beatings and starvation and endless nights when it was the only proof that anyone had ever cared. "I'm sure," I said. We walked together into the forest, our breath misting in the cold air. Vorian knew these woods intimately, had spent years surviving in them, and he led us unerringly to the place where it had all begun. The hollow beneath the old oak was still there, though time and weather had softened its edges. Snow dusted the ground where I'd once knelt beside a dying pup and made the choice that would change both our lives. "This is it," Vorian said quietly, stopping at the tree's base. His hand found mine and squeezed. "This is where you found me." I looked at the hollow and could almost see us as we'd been, two broken children who'd somehow saved each other. The scared slave girl and the cursed runt. Both of us convinced we were worthless. Both of us so wrong. "I was terrified that night," I admitted, the words coming easier now after months of learning to speak my truth. I'd never defied the pack so directly before. I kept thinking they'd catch me, that I'd be punished, that helping you would cost me everything. "It almost did," Vorian said, his voice heavy with old guilt. "No," I turned to face him fully. "It gave me everything. It gave me you. It gave me proof that I was capable of more than just enduring, that I could act, could choose, could matter." I pulled the white stone from my pocket and held it up to the filtered sunlight. It glowed softly, worn smooth by years of being clutched in desperate hands. "I don't need this anymore," I said. "I don't need proof that you cared or that you'd come back. I have you, actually have you, and I think," my voice caught, "I think it's time to let it rest." Vorian watched me with those devastating gold eyes, understanding written across his features. I knelt at the base of the oak, brushing away snow until I found earth. The ground was frozen, but I dug anyway, my fingers going numb as I carved out a small depression. Vorian knelt beside me and helped, his larger hands making quick work of what would have taken me ages. When the hole was deep enough, I placed the white stone inside. It looked so small there, this thing that had meant everything, that had been my talisman against despair. "Thank you," I whispered to it, "for keeping me going, for reminding me that kindness existed. But I don't need you anymore. I have the real thing now." Vorian helped me cover the stone with earth, packing it down gently. Then he stood and pulled a dagger from his belt, the same one he'd used to carve his crown from the bones of enemies. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the tree. I nodded. He carved carefully into the bark, his movements precise despite his size. When he stepped back, I could see what he'd written, V+M enclosed in a rough heart. Simple, honest, permanent. "So anyone who passes will know," Vorian said, "that this was where it began, where two people found each other in the darkness and decided to survive together." I traced the carving with my fingertips, feeling the rough edges of the letters. "It's perfect." We stood there for a long moment, looking at the tree that had sheltered a dying pup 10 years ago. A tree that had witnessed the beginning of something impossible. Then Vorian took my hand and led me a few steps away, to where a young sapling had taken root, probably seeded from the old oak, continuing its legacy. "This one," he said, "this one is ours. We'll come back each year and watch it grow, watch it become strong." "Like us," I said softly. "Like us." We stood together in the falling snow, his arm wrapped around my waist, my head resting against his shoulder. From here, we could see beyond the forest to where our kingdom stretched toward the horizon, vast and complex and full of challenges we'd face together. "I spent 10 years believing I was nothing," I said, the words drifting into the winter air like a confession. "Believing I was worthless, invisible, a mistake that should have been erased. And you spent 10 years proving I was everything. building kingdoms, conquering territories, becoming powerful enough to find me and keep me safe. Vorian's arm tightened around me. But I turned to look up at him, this fierce king who'd once been a broken pup, this monster who'd saved me as completely as I'd saved him. I think maybe we can stop now. Stop proving, stop surviving, stop fighting quite so hard. Let's spend the rest of our lives just being. His smile was slow and devastating, and full of a peace I'd never seen in him before. Being what? Happy, I said simply. Let's just be happy, together, mates and equals and two people who choose each other every single day. I can do that. Vorian cupped my face with both hands, his touch infinitely gentle. I've been surviving for so long I'd almost forgotten how to live. Teach me, Marin, teach me how to just be. I stretched up and kissed him, not desperately, not with the urgency of people afraid they'll lose each other, but with the steady certainty of two souls who'd found their home. We'll teach each other, I whispered against his lips. As the snow continued to fall and the young tree stood witness, we made a new promise, not carved in bark or sealed in stone, but spoken quietly in the place where our story began. To live, to love, to choose each other not because of debt or destiny or desperation, but because we wanted to. Because after 10 years of darkness, we'd both finally found the light. And we were never letting go. We mounted our horses and rode back toward Shadowhearth as the sun broke through the clouds, turning the snow to diamonds. Behind us, the forest held our secrets, the white stone buried like a seed, the carved initials marking the spot where everything changed, the young tree growing toward the sky. Our past was at rest. Our future was waiting. And for the first time in both our lives, we weren't afraid of what came next. We were ready. Together. The eater of packs and the girl who'd fed a dying pup rode home to their kingdom, leaving the frozen woods behind. But they carried with them the most important lesson survival had taught them, that kindness in the darkness isn't weakness. It's the most powerful magic there is. And it had saved them both. Thank you for journeying through Marin and Vorian's story with me. Their tale of survival, redemption, and fierce devotion has been an honor to tell, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can reshape entire destinies. If their story resonated with you, I'd love to stay connected and share more tales of resilient heroines, protective alphas, and the kind of love that transforms darkness into light. Subscribe to join our community of readers who believe in second chances, found families, and protagonists who choose courage even when they're terrified. Your support means everything to this storytelling journey. Thank you for being part of this adventure, and I will see you in my next story.